Welcome to the Wholehearted Eating Podcast, where non-diet nutrition, weight-inclusive care, and integrative health collide. We're your hosts, Dana Montes and Christina Hoyt, licensed integrative clinical nutritionists and body image coaches.
And we believe you deserve to have a joyful relationship with food in your body, even if you have a chronic health condition or symptoms that just won't quit. On this show, together and with our guests, we're bringing the real talk, no BS vibe with tangible tools to help you pursue health and wellness without obsession or restriction.
Remember our disclaimer, this podcast is meant for general information purposes only and should not be taken as a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. I'm so excited to talk about books.
I'm so excited to talk about books. It's my favorite time of year.
Two favorite times of year, summer when we record this and winter when we record this.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. Okay, Kara, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. We're super excited to talk books. I know people love these episodes because it's completely different from our typical content. And we both, honestly, I would still record this even if 4 or 5 people listen to it.
Oh, absolutely. And also, you're about health, right? Reading is a healthy thing. Treating yourself is a healthy thing. So, it's on brand.
Very on brand. Well, we're switching things up a little bit this time. Typically, when we've done this the past 3 times, we're always talking about for those 6 or 8 months of the year, what have been our favorites, disappointments, surprises, all that kind of stuff. We haven't had the best luck with books the first half of this year. So what we thought we would do instead of just being downers the whole time, is to go into our backlist of books and talk about our all-time favorites, books nobody talks about, but we think deserve way more hype and other stuff like that. So we always talk about how books that were published before COVID are the ones that really grab our attention. So we wanted to go to stuff like that and just talk about some deeper recommendations.
No, seriously. And also, when people ask me for something to read, usually they aren't big readers. They're not like us that read 50 to 100 books a year. They have not read a book in 5 years. Maybe some of my friends legitimately have not read a book for fun since high school. And so they're not looking for my top rec of the past 6 months. They're looking for the top rec of my life. What will make them start reading again?
Okay, before we jump in, we're about to talk about a lot of books. I don't want you to worry about writing them down, Googling them while you're driving. Be safe. I will have a list for you linked in the show notes of the podcast with all of the books that we talk about. So if you're looking for names, authors, anything, it will be linked in the show notes. And we do this twice a year. We would love to hear from you. What are some books that you've been loving this year? Do you have any books that were disappointments? We would also love to know, what are some of your favorite all-time recommendations that you always give people? Update for the podcast. I don't know how far she is by this point, but I got Christina to start reading a book, which I don't think she's read a book in I don't know how long. I got her to start reading Part of Your World, which is one of my top romance books from last year, and she's really loving it so far. So, woo, love that. But it's stuff like that. It's what are the books that we think will help people get back into reading or be gripped by a story or something like that. So we're excited to talk about them.
Love it.
Do you want to start with just going with some of our all-time favorites to start off on a high?
I think that we should list our top, our all-time. My number 1 and my number 2, which I promised Dana I would not talk about too much because I've talked about them, I'm pretty sure, every single time that we have done this podcast. My favorite book of all time, I recommend it to everyone, is Caraval. It is just my favorite book of all time. I think it is just so magical, so wonderful. I literally like it better than Harry Potter. Don't need to tell you guys anymore. If I'm not convinced you to read you this book, oh my God, just read it. Second favorite all time that I absolutely love is The Bridge Kingdom, which I've talked about at length the past 2 podcasts. The reason I think it's so wonderful to get out of a book slump is because of how fast-paced this is. It's also not a very long book. It's only a duology. And the first chapter is gripping. If you don't like the first chapter, don't read the whole book. Just move on. But I think you'll love the first chapter. So those are my first 2 that I can just throw out there.
Mm-hmm.
All right, you go.
Yeah. Okay. 2 of them that I don't think I've really talked about these that much, but one is Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse. I think I've mentioned it before.
Yeah, I still have it from you. It's on my shelf right now. I need to read it.
So great. So great. It's like a pre-Columbian Mayan-inspired fantasy with like some elements of a little bit of historical, but it's not historical fiction. It's definitely very like fantasy heavy. So cool. I'd never read anything like it before. And it was like, as with any fantasy, there are sometimes a little bit slower parts, but you're just like, oh, I was so gripped. So then, which I think we both agree this is the best book in this series, is Empire of Storms by Sarah J. Maas, which is the 5th book in the Throne of Glass series.
Perfect.
And I love that series, but that book just like, it really does live in my head rent-free.
Yes,
and I've only read
agree.
it once. Like, I think that was probably top 5 biggest book hangovers that I've had.
Yeah.
It's definitely from that book.
I think that book, that 5th book of Throne of Glass, is the last time I stayed up until 3 a.m. Which makes me sound like such a loser. But like the last time I stayed up until 3 a.m. was to finish that book. My number 3 all-time rec, it's very important to talk about, is Red Queen. So this is the book that I always recommend because this is what made me start reading again. So Dana and I have been talking a lot that creating these all-time recs was actually very difficult because we didn't read for a very long time. Even Dana, who reads, triple digits every year. I don't think I read a fiction book, with the exception of like Twilight.
Yeah.
In college or
definitely not.
Or after college. I honestly think this is the first book I really remember reading, and you were the one that made me read it. So I went with Dana to her old high school in Bethesda, Maryland, does this wild, like we're talking like hundreds of thousands of books. They do this crazy book sale every single year. And Dana walked me through it, and she picked up Red Queen and she said, "Oh my goodness, I love this book. You have to read it." And I said, "What the hell?" It's 4 books. The author makes me feel so terrible about myself because this author, she wrote this book straight out of college. She legitimately wrote this when she was, I think, 20 or 21 years old to pay off her college loans. That was the first book she ever wrote. And it was
a New York Times bestselling author.
Bestseller, and now she's written, I think, 7 books and they're all on the NYT bestseller list. Essentially a girl, it's kind of, I wouldn't say fantasy, it's more dystopian, would you say?
Yeah. I think Red Queen, and I was realizing as I was going through my list, especially of like backlist book recommendations, a lot of what I really loved is kind of genre bending, right?
Yeah.
So it's like Red Queen is like, yeah, it's fantasy, but there's also like a little bit of sci-fi and then also a little bit of dystopian, and it's really cool.
The characters are phenomenal. So again, talking about this author again, Victoria, by the way, okay, major disclaimer for Kara here. I am so bad at pronouncing authors' names. I idolize these authors, and I genuinely just learned like 2 months ago that it's Sarah J. Maas, not Sarah J. Moss. So I'm going to butcher I'm going to butcher all the author names. I'll try my best. I'm so sorry, people. Yes. Okay. Moving on. Victoria Aveyard. This author, she went to college for screenwriting. And so her she knows, like when you write a screenplay, all that's there is the dialogue. Like that's all that's there. You don't write about, and he walked to the fridge and got out a cup of coffee. You don't, that's all gone. And so her dialogue is fantastic. Her characters are fantastic. You really don't know where the romance is going. It's not something that's so in your face and so obvious. And she has been praised universally for her twists. Like the twist in book 1, I did not see coming. Like I still think about it. So definitely put it on your TBR.
Well, that's the other reason why neither of us had started her new series too, because we were both like,
oh yeah,
there's no way that I'm going to go through the agony of reading this first book, knowing that there's probably going to be a brutal twist or cliffhanger or something, and not be able to go into the second book. And then the same thing when the second book came out. We're like, nope, we have to wait until the third book comes out. Okay. Yes. Also, some of these I did not mention because they're also in like my top 10 of all time, but I knew Kara was going to mention them. So,
okay. Yeah.
Also
love it.
Red Queen, Caraval. My next one is Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor. I read this not last year, but the year before. The one thing I'll say about this is if you like The Night Circus, which Kara does not, then you probably like Strange the Dreamer. It's very kind of purple prose writing, unlike The Night Circus, which is also in my all-time favorites, but I've mentioned it before. Stuff does actually happen in this book.
Okay,
Unlike The Night Circus.
Unlike The Night Circus.
Yes. I'll go right into my next one because I think these two are kind of like tied.
Mm-hmm.
Another one where a ton of stuff happens, but the writing is also amazing is Legendborn by Tracy Deonn.
Oh, good one.
Also in my top 5 book hangovers of all time. It's like a genre bending thing. It's like there's elements of contemporary, but there's also elements of historical, and then there's also a huge fantasy plot, and then it's also kind of like a King Arthur retelling in certain ways, and it takes place in the South, and it's just, wow, it's so good.
Yeah, it's fantastic. The cliffhanger is brutal. Like, waiting for book 2 was absolute agony. Number 4, I'll go through my 4th and my 5th because I have talked about number 4. My number 4, which I've talked about on this podcast before, is Prison Healer. Essentially, a 7-year-old girl gets arrested with her father as a child, and her family's trying to break her out of this crazy prison. Her dad dies when she's in prison, and she's just left there, even though has never done a thing wrong. This was such an epic series. So, I mean, zero complaints about it. I mean, these are our all-time favorite books of all time. So really, we have no complaints about anything. But, the writing, fantastic. The characters, fantastic. The romance, fantastic. The twist, also, again, like this book literally held me in a chokehold until the last page. And when that happened, basically the last thing that happened in this book, I had to reread it to make sure I understood it. That's how bad the twist was. I was like, wait a minute, hold on. There's no way. Yeah, it was so insane. Talked about that before. Number 5 on my list is 6 of Crows. Okay, how do you say this one's name? Lee
Bardugo.
Thank you. So the author who wrote Shadow and Bone. That's right? Shadow and Bone. Yes. Okay. To be honest, I actually was not that crazy about Shadow and Bone. I finished it. It was fine. It just felt way more, we've talked about this before, but on YA, there's a scale. Some are very juvenile reading, kind of like the Hunger Games, and some are on the verge of like being adult fantasy. Mm-hmm. I'm a little turned off by the more juvenile reading. Like, I just need like better dialogue, better descriptions, just more elevated writing. And that's how Shadow and Bone felt to me. 6 of Crows, not like it. Mm-hmm. It's so jarring. You barely can come to terms with the fact that these two series, even though they are literally set in the exact same world, are written by the same author.
Yep.
It is that epic fantasy series. Multiple POVs, which can be a turnoff for me when it's overdone, but it is not overdone. I think there's about 5 or 6 characters, which sounds like a lot, but they're all fantastic characters. And again, it's like the chapter 1 magic where you're landed in chapter 1 and there's no lead in. Like, shit is happening.
Yeah.
Also, Kaz Brecker, one of my favorite book boyfriends of all time. Fucking love him. Also love the fact, oh my God. I mean, all authors do this, but I love when we get to the behind the scenes telling. So the author, I can't remember what disease she has, but she has some sort of disability where she does walk with a cane. And she's like, I want a sexy book boyfriend who walks with a cane. Like, I don't want this like perfect guy who is born with everything, And so this guy literally walks with a cane. He's 17 years old. And yet I just think he is just like the sexiest motherfucker on paper. I just love him. Yeah. Those are my top 5.
Yeah, that's a great one. Along with that, I would say if you like 6 of Crows, you probably will also like An Ember in the Ashes by Sabaa Tahir, which is also one of my top series of all time. Yeah, I'm gonna leave it there. There's so many other ones that we could talk about, but
so many.
An Ember in the Ashes, a lot of these, well, let's see. Only 2 of the ones that I've mentioned I've actually read twice, and they were 5 stars both times.
Yeah.
I have not reread Black Sun, Empire of Storms, or Strange the Dreamer. I haven't read Empire of Storms because I haven't reread Throne of Glass because that's 8 freaking books and like thousands of pages. But
Yeah.
I'm sure if I reread any of those, they would all be 5 stars. And I will reread Black Sun because the 3rd book in what I think is a trilogy, but I'm not really sure, is coming out this summer. So I'm going to reread it, but I'm going to wait until that book comes out, people to read it to see, okay, is it actually a trilogy or is it not a trilogy? Because if it's not, I'm just going to wait.
Yeah. I'll finally
God.
read it then. I didn't know. I thought it was a completed series, but if it's not done yet, yeah, I'll totally put that on my list.
I thought it was going to be a duology, and I was reading it at the same time as my friend Marcos, who's also an author. I think I'll mention some of his books later. And we both loved the first book. And we were texting back and forth, and I was like 80 pages out, and I was like, there is no way that this is a duology. There's absolutely no way. She's opening more threads. She's not closing all of them. And he's like, oh no, it's supposed to be a trilogy. I'm like, how did I not know this? I was so annoyed.
But I mean, authors like to mess with you, which I understand. Obviously, they just like love to like bask in the tears of their readers and just screw with you. So,
yes.
That's totally
my
fine.
God. Okay, speaking of authors basking in the tears of their readers, let's go on to a section that we're calling books that were like 4-ish stars, like not quite 5, but we still think about them.
Still think about them. Yes, I love this category because honest to God, mine were not 5-star reads, but yet I just like think about them all the time. Okay, you go first.
Okay, the one that I'm specifically referencing is called The Sword of Kaigen by M.L. Wong.
Never heard of it.
It was like kind of having a moment a little bit on like BookTube, not Book Talk. It is an epic war fantasy generational saga, but it's a standalone. Standalone fantasy like does not exist.
No,
so
that's not a thing.
It was crazy. And so it really throws you because in the first half of the book, you're following this one character and then something happens and like about the halfway point, you start following another character and you're like, wait, what? And at first you're like, I was never invested in this second character. Like, what the heck is happening? This seems like a bait and switch. But then, oh my God, it is truly one of the best character arcs I have ever read in my entire life. And It's a big book. It's like 600 pages or something. It is actually on Kindle Unlimited, but this author is now getting traction because after... I don't even know how many reviews this book has on Goodreads. Not that many. But she has written many other like sci-fi fantasy type books. And I think most were self-published. But she came out with another book last year called Blood Over Brighthaven. And I think it has like a 4.63 rating on Goodreads. So it was picked up by a traditional publisher. And now it's getting republished in the fall. And I'm just like, oh my God, I need to read it. But like mentally and emotionally, I need to prepare myself before I read a book like that. And I will say, I just read The Poppy War a couple weeks ago. And if you like the Poppy War series, I would highly recommend The Sword of Kaigen.
Oh, love it. Okay.
The more I think about it, the more I'm like, maybe it is a 4.5 or like even bordering 5-star. The reason I didn't rate it 5-star originally was because it kind of took me about like 100 pages to really get into it. But it's one, because I mean, it's epic, right? And it's like, it's approximating like Imperial Japan, basically. And so there's samurais and there's all these different very military warlords and, other stuff like that. And it took me a little while to get all the names right and stuff. It's one of those books that has a glossary in the back so you can remember people's names. So it's a little bit hard to get into. But after you pass like 100 pages, shocked.
Love it. Okay. One book that I thought was like, it's not fantasy. Well, I guess technically it's fantasy. It has like some sort of magic in it. But was just more like a cozy read. And so I think that's why I put it as 4 stars. Where it's like, oh, that was fun. That was cute. But again, it wasn't, that chokehold fantasy that we think about all the time. Is Ona Out of Order? I can't remember when I think I read this around like 2019, 2020, but essentially a girl, she's 18 years old. She has the perfect life. I think she's starting college. She has like this sweet boyfriend. She loves her parents. She has this great life. has her 18th birthday. The next morning, she wakes up and she's 50 years old. Just so bizarre. So every single year of her life that she gets older, she is thrown into a new year. So she'll go from like, she's 50, but she's only 19 in a 50-year-old's body. And then she has to learn what happened. And the people around her knew what happened to her before, but she doesn't know. And then she'll be thrown back into, say, a 25-year-old's body. And then she's thrown forward again into like a 6, and just, she's completely going like back and forth. And so there's a lot of mystery going on because again, there's this theme within the book of no spoilers, as in she has to wait for the appropriate year to find out what happened to her. But all these other people, again, like know what happens. So it's like very, very weird. And for whatever reason, I just like can't get this book out of my head. Like, again, it's such a cozy read. It's easy. I don't even think this book is like 300 pages long. And it was so easy to read, but I still think about it to this day.
It's funny because I know exactly what the cover looks like for that book. I have a very good memory for covers, even if I've never read the book before. I could not tell you a single thing about that book. I've probably seen it so many times sorting and organizing for the book sale for my high school, but I've never heard anyone describe what it actually is. They're just like, oh my God, this book is so good.
It's so good. I did get your friend Kate to read it, and she loved it too. Yeah. Awesome. So put it on your cozy read list.
Another one that this was definitely a 4-star, but it's one of those, it's a thriller, which I don't read a lot of thrillers, right? We've talked about this before. Mm-hmm. But I still think about it somehow. The disclaimer I'll put on this is like, if you're a big thriller reader, I've heard that people don't like this book as much. But if you're like me and you don't read as many thrillers, then it's like, holy shit, oh my God. So this book is called In My Dreams, I Hold a Knife by Ashley Winstead. And it is these 6 friends in present day, 5 or 6, that all went to the same college. And one of their friends died while they were in college, I think. And like no one really knows what happened to them. And one of them went to jail, but then everyone is really wondering, like, did they actually do it? Did they not do it? And I'm getting kind of confused because it's split timeline, because you're in the present and seeing them at their college reunion and how they are. And then you're also seeing the previous timeline of like the events unfolding until you see everything that happens like at the very end of the book. And one thing I'll also say is this main character is unfucking sufferable. You're never rooting for her. She sucks. Because she is a people pleaser, perfectionist, but not like an internal, oh my gosh, I want to help everybody. Like, I just want everyone to like me. It's like, I want everyone to like me and I'm going to be the best at everything and appearances are everything and I want to have the best job and make the most money. And when I go back to my college reunion, I'm going to be the hottest fucking shit there. And she is so unhinged. But this is one of those books where like, I would stay up until like 1, 2 a.m. to finish because I could not put it down.
Yep, that's the signal. If you just, again, like if you can't put it down or you just like keep thinking about it for like whatever reason. Okay, I've talked about this one before, so I'm kind of like going to touch on it and then I'll move on to my third one. So The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. This was a super popular book maybe 3-4 years ago. I feel it was when like COVID was going on. I put it as 4 stars. I loved it. It was great. But I was, it didn't have me in that chokehold kind of thing. And I still fucking think about this book. So if you haven't read it, essentially a girl, she's like 200 years old. And every time she leaves a room, physically leaves a room and a door closes, everyone forgets who she is. And so she has to survive. Like she can't get an apartment because no one like remembers her. She can't like hold a bank account. And so it's just every day she essentially has to survive. So I still think about that. And then the last one was such a weird book to bring up. It was such a popular book from in that like 2011 phase. I did not read for forever. And when I told Dana I wanted to read it, she's like, there is some weird shit going on there.
Which is exactly so what you're going to talk about.
Yep, exactly. But I still think about it. So we have to talk about it. Is City of Bones. Okay. So I think the series itself, it's called Mortal Instruments. Mm-hmm. It's been made into a movie, which I actually loved, by the way. Then it was made into a series, which is super cringe, but we don't have to
Yeah.
go into that. It's a fantasy book. I think it started out as Harry Potter fan fiction and then got essentially published. Like that's a rumor. It has that thing. There's a certain word for it, but it's when like it's taking place in a real life in real city, but then has magical elements going on. So
Low
it's
fantasy. Yeah.
low fantasy. Yeah. So it's in New York City, but then has like this whole hidden magical world going on. The dialogue is just like so awesome. You
It's
just like
so funny.
it's so funny. It's so great. Again, it's just like the best book boyfriend you could imagine. Just so wonderful. But there is this one trope that you genuinely, it's like, how did this get published?
And you're like,
Literally,
why would you even
go
what I will
there.
say is just don't let that just
It
keep
stop
going.
you. Don't let it stop
Just
you.
keep going.
There's like no way to discuss this trope without it being like the worst spoiler. So we're not like, but I literally called Dana and I was like,
Yeah.
do I keep going? And she said yes. And
I was like, it's gonna be okay. Just keep going.
I did. And I ended up loving the series. TLDR, this trope, I genuinely don't know why an editor, a publisher, like there are so many players involved in publishing a book. How no one said there is a million other ways to go about this.
Yeah.
Just pick any other option was a better choice than this. But just keep going.
Yeah.
I did love it. Like, even though
Yeah.
it's so weird, but like
Yeah.
I did love this series.
It's just a good time.
It's such a good time. It's such a good time. I mean, it's a really fun world. And again, like the dialogue is really fun. Pretty much everything this author has ever written has been in this world. She would be so good at writing adult fantasy. I bet she can like really kill that. Yeah, I read 2 series in this book and I loved both of them. I loved the first one more, but yeah, it's a really fun time.
Here's another one. I'm starting to get into series that I have literally heard no one else talk about ever, which I love. And shout out to my high school book sale. That is the only reason I found these books. Because basically what I'll do is when I'm like helping set up for the sale or other stuff, I'm like, oh, I've never heard of this before. I'll like read the flap and then be like, oh, that sounds good. And during COVID, this sale happened the week before everything shut down. And we knew that things were going to get shut down. So when we were there, I was just like, I'm going to pick up a bunch of random stuff I've never heard of before. I don't even care. I know we're going into lockdown. And I read so much in 2020. A lot of these are from that time. So this series is called Snow Like Ashes by Sarah Rosh. I think that's how you pronounce her name. It's from around the time of like Shadowhunters and this other stuff. It's like early 2010s.
Love it.
And it is a very typical tropey YA fantasy series. It's got like the chosen one trope. There's a war going on. There's elemental magic. There's like revolution and other stuff. And it was just a really good time. And when I was reading it, I was like, yeah, this is really fun. But then for some reason, I still think about it years later, even though it wasn't like mind blowing or anything. It was just a great time. So I would definitely read more by that author.
Love it. All right. So in this category, again, things that like no one has ever heard of, I have quite a few nonfiction. The first one on my list is a nonfiction. It is not a series. It's a book. It's a memoir called Wild Swans. So I had to read this book in college for, of all classes, a Chinese sociology class. And it blew my fucking mind. Like I still think about it to this day. So essentially, a girl, I think okay, forgive me. I read this book 13 years ago. Okay. I think she's going to the UK for university. And essentially she writes a memoir of all the women in her family, starting with like her great grandmother who was a geisha. Like,
wow.
Yeah. And this is, by the way, like the only written history of this family is like she just interviewed her mom and her grandmother and recorded it all down. So like there's only one chapter on, again, it's either her great grandmother or her great great grandmother. I can't remember which. Because that's all they knew about her. And I remember this great grandmother. It was like she met this soldier, fell in love with him, got pregnant within literally a day. He stayed, I don't know, for a couple days. Like they had like this week romance or whatever. And then he left and she did not see him again for 7 years. Like that's how long so every story is like that. So she goes through, and it's so interesting to hear about like the history of China interwoven with like her family history. So her parents were these badasses that when like the Communist Party like took over, there was like some really shitty things that happened to her parents that were just like gripping. Like her mother was interrogated while she was literally kneeling on broken glass, or her father, he was told, there's a word for it, but I can't remember like the word. It starts with a K. He was told to bow his head, but that was like from like the empire, and they no longer like believed in bowing their heads. He's like, I will not bow my head. And saying that was like punishable by death. And she was like, everyone thought of my father as a man of iron. Like I still remember that sentence. It was seriously the most like powerful book I think I've like ever read. And like it will live rent free with me like until the day I die. I think it's the only book I bought in college that I still have on my shelf.
Yeah, I have never heard of that one before.
Yep.
Yeah, well, I feel weird going back to a fantasy series after
Go
that.
for it. Go for it.
No, actually, this one is not fantasy. This is also one that I have never, ever heard anyone talk about. I don't even know if I've told you about this one. I think you will like it, though. This series is called The Testing by Joelle Charbonneau, I think. When I read it, this was definitely during COVID, it's kind of a cross between The Maze Runner, The Hunger Games, and something where it's not like a magic school element, but there's this kind of dystopian series of tests for these young people to become one of the elites in the government to help like restructure society. But a bunch of sinister shit starts happening. And there's also like a childhood best friend that's, kind of the romantic interest, but then it's like, but are they a good person? Are they not a good person? Like, can I trust them? Can I trust anyone? It was just, oh my God. Yeah, it was great. I had never heard of it before. I read the first book and I was like, oh my God, I am so glad I got these other two from the book sale because it was just there in like a set. Oh my God, so good. I feel like the next time I'm in a book slump, I'm just going to reread that.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. Okay. Again, touched on this before, so I'm kind of trying to skip over it. But The Words is my favorite book of all time. It's by Ashley Jade. She's an indie author, but this book actually was just picked up by traditional publishing because it was like so popular. I'm also in the author's Facebook group, and someone sent a screenshot because they follow Hello Sunshine, which is like the book company that Reese Witherspoon owns. And they're just like, look at her shelf. And this person had like zoomed in and like The Words was like on Reese Witherspoon's shelf. Now that doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean it's being picked up or anything. It was just crazy that it at least caught her attention. I fucking love it. It's fantastic. Read it. And then my last one that, again, like no one has heard of, is also a nonfiction. It's called Born to Run by Christopher McDougall. Okay. So I remember when this article came. I think I was in high school, like early high school, and I ran track and cross country in high school and in college. So I was like reading this article in Runner's World magazine, and it was about this tribe. I'm going to butcher this name. I deeply apologize. I think it's called like the Tarahumara tribe in Mexico. And essentially, this writer who wrote for Runner's World, actually, no, I think he wrote for ESPN. No, because yes, I remember now. He had never ran like a mile in his life. He had heard about this crazy tribe that runs 100-mile races down in Mexico, but they're completely cut off from society. Apparently, like one time in like the 80s or something, someone had recruited them to try running in the Olympics in the marathon, and they finished dead last and then complained that the race wasn't long enough. So to make a super, super long book short, actually it's not that long. This author, this writer, goes down to Mexico. First of all, he has to find this tribe. Like, it's not like there's like an address. Okay. He literally has to go down, talk to people. I mean, he spends months just trying to find these people. So he finds them. There was like this one random white dude that became part of this tribe, and he was like this crazy runner. So he talked to him, came back to the United States, and he recruits this small group of people from the United States to go race this tribe in this 100-mile race. It's a total true story. Again, it was like an article in Runner's World, and then he wrote this memoir about it. And it was just like, it was so wild. So super interesting book.
That is really cool. Yeah, I had heard, again, I know what the cover looks like.
Yeah.
I've heard of it before. But yeah, I've never read it. Of course, you know, you being a runner, I'm sure that would be like right up your alley. Oh,
was
that's
epic.
so cool. Okay. Also going a deep recommendation. This is not a favorite book of mine, but it is something that I was shocked by and thought about it for a long time. Don't let your jaw hit the floor when I say this. Stephenie Meyer wrote another book called The Host. It's again dystopian-ish kind of fantasy. It was so good. Like,
that's crazy.
I probably read this in, I don't know, 2015 or 14 or something like that. It was like pretty soon after the period when I had stopped reading for a while, because basically between when the last Harry Potter book came out and like 2015, so probably 2007 to 2015, I don't think I read anything besides stuff for college and grad school, right? And it wasn't until I think 2015 when I like very slowly started to read stuff again. And I read this book because I was like, oh, Stephenie Meyer, like I read Twilight when it came out. I'm like, that was fun. You would not be able to tell that the author who wrote Twilight wrote this.
That's crazy. I've never even heard of this book.
It was another book sale find. From what I remember, it's you follow this person who is somehow in a lab and there's like aliens involved. It's kind of dystopian. Like the host is kind of like a hint at like what's happening there. But then this person is part of some, I think, kind of either testing or government facility, but she tries to escape. And then there's like a whole mystery part of it. And it was wild. I don't know what I would think about it if I read it again today, but
is it
was
a standalone or is it a series?
Yep.
Standalone book.
Standalone.
That's so crazy. I've never even heard of this.
Stephenie Meyer. I don't know about this new shit from like Edward's point of view or whatever. But like, yeah, Twilight got really unhinged. This is unhinged, but in a different way.
Love it.
Another like deep recommendation that was one of the first series I read when I was getting back into reading is called Queen of the Tearling by Erica Johansson. Another book sale find. So I had to pull this summary from Goodreads because I can remember that the series was really good, but I could not remember like what it was about. So it says, an untested young princess must claim her throne, learn to become a queen, and combat a malevolent sorceress in an epic battle between light and darkness in this spectacular debut, first novel in a trilogy. So what I remember about this is, like many fantasy series, it evolves from kind of like a narrow perspective in the first book and then really expands in the next two. And this one does that, but then it also, after the first book, blends genres together. And I remember being blown away, just thinking this was going to be like a castle, fantasy, queen, princess thing, like deception, blah, 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 whatever. You know, like I love that shit. But I was like, okay, expecting that. And then I remember, I will never forget the ending of the third book. And obviously I'm not going to say anything about it, but it is so divisive. Either you love it or you absolutely hate it.
Oh,
and
no.
It is wild because it's just the way that it ended. And it's just, you know, like any other book, it's a choice that the author made. And you're like, either I can't believe she did that, or like, whoa, that is so crazy. So I might have to reread this one too.
Did you like it? Did you like the ending? Were you in like the love or the hate group?
I remember hating the ending of that book. But I don't know how I'd feel about it now because it's so kind of like, meta is a very loaded word now, but it's so, it felt meta at the time, but now I'm like, I kind of see why she did that. And I mean, at the end of the day, it makes you think, and I've never forgotten it, you know? I have one more.
Okay, go for it.
This is also a newer one, but kind of completely out of left field. So I read this year, and it was such a good time. It was so fun. I listened to this on audiobook. This is a cozy mystery. So you have to go into it knowing it's going to be kind of ridiculous. So it's called Vera Wong's Unsolicited Advice for Murderers.
Love
And
it.
so
What a fantastic title.
It's this little old lady that lives above and works in a tea house that has kind of come on hard times. And she, like, her son doesn't live with her anymore, and she's kind of unhappy and very bored. And she's basically the only person who goes to her own tea house every single day. And then one day, this person stumbles into her tea shop and dies. And it's while she wakes up every single morning at 4 a.m. to do her exercises and go on her walk, and she has this routine and everything. And it is so funny. And then she walks downstairs and she decides, before she calls the police, she's like, oh, I'm going to clean everything up. I'm going to draw a line around him in Sharpie, and I'm going to do all these different things. And then she thinks that the police are not taking the case seriously. So she decides to take it into her own hands.
Love it.
It's just such a fun time. And there's also like a found family aspect to it. And you have to go in knowing it's completely ridiculous and like not realistic. But it was so fun. And I would highly recommend the audiobook because just the humor in here was so great.
Love it. Love it. I definitely need to like stack up on my cozy reads for when fall, winter hits. Like that's when I'm like, yes, I'm down for this.
Yeah, that was a fun one. Okay, where do you want to go next?
Well, I just talked about like a couple of nonfiction, but I have more. I could do either best nonfiction or like best romance.
Keep going with nonfiction because I have some memoirs too.
Okay. So I talked about a couple. Educated. Most people have heard about this, so I won't touch on it like very long because it's been on the New York Times bestseller list for like forever. It is so fucked up. I mean, honest to God, I wanted to punch a wall.
Yeah, it was hard to read.
It is hard to read. It's about this girl. She's born in Idaho. Her dad is obviously schizophrenic and just big conspiracy theorists for parents. The majority of her brothers and sisters do not have birth certificates. They've never been to the hospital, even though half of them have almost died multiple times. They don't go to school. And essentially, she has one brother that's sane, and he gets into college, and he convinces her to go to college. And so, in secret, she takes the ACT to get into college. Yes, very, very difficult to read. The other one I would not say this is cozy, but just very interesting is maybe you should talk to someone. So, written by a therapist. And it's a memoir of her being a therapist in therapy, but then also the stories of basically like the 5 most fascinating clients she's ever had. And I loved it.
Yeah. Yeah. I've heard really interesting things about that one too.
Yeah.
Okay. Nonfiction, but these are memoirs. This is a good, cozy, just like feel good listen. Dear Girls by Ali Wong, who is a comedian.
Oh, was it good?
Was so good, so fun to listen to. And honestly, I have learned that anytime that a comedian or someone like this has a memoir, you got to go audiobook because they add different inflections in there. They tell stories like they're jokes and they've actually lived through them, so they have a better perspective on it than an audiobook narrator who's not them. But it was so funny. I had such a good time. I actually bought this audiobook and I've listened to it twice and I'll probably end up listening to it again. It was so funny. So definitely recommend. Another one on a little bit more serious note, and this is a more work-related book, I would say, but I don't think I've talked about it. It's called What's Eating Us? Women, Food, and the Epidemic of Body Anxiety by Cole Cadson. The big disclaimer on this one is if you are someone who has a current eating disorder, or if you're really currently struggling with those types of thoughts, I wouldn't listen to this because this author has been through it and describes what it's like to go through it and to have the intrusive thoughts that go along with having an eating disorder and body dysmorphia and all this other stuff. But I think people will find this so relatable, even if you've never had an eating disorder, you've never had disordered eating, like very small amounts of people.
Very small.
Fall into
particularly women, yeah.
Yes, can fall into the like, oh, that's never been me category. But I think it's so relatable. The inner dialogue is just so on point, and it really makes you feel very seen and also very hopeful in the long term, while also understanding while all these kind of complex things are at work that make you feel small and make you feel this way. So that's definitely a heavier recommendation, but it was a good one that I read last year.
I have one more to put in this category, and that is On Writing by Stephen King. Okay, so I am a baby. I do not like horror, like movies or to read. So I've read one Stephen King book in my entire life. Well, besides this, and it scared the crap out of me. So didn't read that. But his work, I mean, like, you could argue that he might be like one of the top 5 most greatest American authors of all time. And so he wrote this book called On Writing, literally to discuss, as he says at the beginning, the language of writing. And so you people listening don't know me, but I'm a copywriter by trade. I have literally written for a living for a decade. And it is so true that writing and speaking are 2 entirely different languages. And it is so wonderful to hear someone like say that and just like put it so eloquently. And so this book is half just teaching someone to write in that language, and then half a memoir of himself. He talks at length about his alcoholism, which is very fascinating. He talks about his wife, which is amazing, how much he loves this woman. He wrote Carrie, which is like the first book he ever wrote, crumpled it up, threw it in the trash. She got it out of the trash and was like, I think you have something here. And so she was the person to convince him to like write Carrie. And then he taught, like, they were so broke together. He talks about like they lived in a trailer. They both had to have 2 jobs. He worked at school, plus he had to work at a laundromat. They didn't have a phone. And he talks about when he like finally sold Carrie, and he literally just like sat down and cried. It is so fascinating. If you are interested in writing literally at all, like, read this book. It is just, it's awesome.
All right. Let's go on to some good stuff before we dump on some books.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, let's do romance, and mainly stuff that we haven't really talked about.
Okay, perfect. I put this one in, which is very surprising for me because your girl loves some dirty books, but I put in a YA romance, which we all know the Netflix series, To All the Boys I Loved Before. And by the way, I watched the movie before I read the book, and I still freaking loved it. This is the only book, this is the only trilogy of my life that I read in 2 days. I read 3 books in 2 days. I literally read the first book, walked to the bookstore, and bought the next 2 books. It is just so adorable. And just, again, like, you think that, oh, well, I read romance for spice. That would typically be the position I would take. But it is just like so adorable. They love each other so much. And the banter and the dialogue is just fantastic. I loved this series. I recommend it. Like, it is such a cozy read, and it's just so freaking cute. Even if you have read, because also, as the series goes on, there's more differences between book and movie. So even if you read the movie, I still recommend the books.
Okay. Similar, that has a movie adaptation. I think the Crazy Rich Asian series is so good. It's such a good time. If you like reality TV or Bravo, you should read this series. I love the movie and I love the books. The movie takes different turns than the books do, and really the movie is only about the first book. So there's 2 more books in the series that come after that. I just had such a great time reading that series.
Love it. Okay, this one was pretty popular about 4-ish years ago, but A Rogue of One's Own. So it's one of those, what's it called when it's like a series, but every book in the series
Companion novels.
Yeah, it's like a standalone or whatever. I have read the other books within this series. They're good, but this is the one that I recommend, mainly because I love the heroine. So all the books are set in like the 1800s, either late 1800s or beginning 1900s, with the women's suffrage movement. And in this particular one, this woman for that time was a huge feminist. Like you just love her. She's little adorable pixie of a thing, but she is a badass. And so just loved her, loved like the main guy. And and I also just like, if you love fantasy, like of course you're gonna fucking love a book set in like the 1800s, 1900s. Cause like, so I just like love the world too.
Mm-hmm. One that I think I may have mentioned before. This is kind of a niche recommendation. This book is called The Romantic Agenda by Claire Kahn. This is about an asexual main character, but who is not aromantic. And so she's never been in a relationship before, but she wants to be in a romantic relationship. And there's also great friendships in this book that I love.
Okay, so I threw this in here. Technically in the romantic category, but this is dark romance. This is for my dirty girls out there, okay? Like, just like name a trigger warning. This series has it, okay? And by the way, I was texting Dana about this. I have read Hunting and Haunting Adeline, and that does not hold a candle to this series. This
I'm afraid.
is, without question, the dirtiest series I've ever read. Okay. I mean, it doesn't have the only like Hunting, the second book, as I told you before at your previous podcast, that just had like straight up rape in it. So that does not happen in this series. But everything else, that was just stupid. Like that was just ridiculous. This series is just wild. Okay. So the series is The Royals of Forsyth University. Don't know if I pronounced Forsyth correctly, but the very first book that you'll need to go look is Lords of Pain. So it is different trilogies. This is going to sound so stupid, all about like a different, what I would call like a frat house, but it's not really a frat house at this made up university. And they're all based on like a royal system. So the first trilogy is on like the lords, and then it's the dukes. And then the third trilogy is based on the princes. There's 8 books, 9. Number 9 will be written, I think, this summer. And yes, I've read all of them. They are, again, these are like the dirtiest books I have ever read in my life. They are a reverse, how do you say the word, harem romance, which means multiple guys, one girl. I'll answer the question. Does it happen all at once? Yes, it does. Like it is just like, because that's like the number one question everyone's going to want to know. Like, are they like individual romances? No, they are not. It's like all together. And it is like the first book of each like new trilogy. You hate these guys. Like I have never hated characters. Like I want this girl to burn them to the ground. But she kind of does. Like, and that's why I think I like these books, even though they're so dirty. First of all, the writing is actually good. Like, I'm not saying it's the most epic writing I've ever read, but the writing is good. The writing in Hunting and Haunting Adeline, not good. Okay, this writing is by 2 authors. They write them together. So those must be some really fun Google Docs. Like I can't imagine these like comments of these 2 authors with these like straight up like crazy scenes happening. But yeah, the writing is actually good. The heroines are badasses. Like they don't just like let things like walk all over them. They hold their own, and they are scheming and they are mysterious. And so I actually like that. But yeah, the second book, not just of the trilogy in itself, but the second book overall. So the second Lord's book is like that's my limit. When like dirty girl, like people who love dirty books are like, oh, I don't have a limit. Like I'll read anything. This was my limit. Like I was like, I have seen the limit. I will not go past it. Like this was it. Like it was, again, every single trigger warning, like you can like possibly imagine, like down to like knife play. It is like everything is free reign. And so I have given you all the disclaimers. Go forth.
If you're into dark shit.
If you were into some dark shit, I remember I actually got into, because there was like a reel, an Instagram reel. I once commented about, a girl being like, "Oh, this is the dirtiest thing I've ever read," and it's just be like, me on my way to go read it. And I commented on this, and I was like, I challenge anyone in this thread to go read this series. And I had so many people follow up with me like a month late. Like they had commented to themselves to remind themselves to read it. And they came back and they're like, "Holy fucking shit, that second book." And I was like, I know. Like that was like, again, this is like the dirtiest book that I've ever read. But again, the writing actually is good, which is surprising. Usually if the dirtier things go, again, these people are not getting traditional publishing. They don't have editors and stuff. Like these women actually are good writers. And damn, to be inside their minds for a little bit. Whew, yeah. There's some pretty insane scenes going on. So yeah.
Oh my God, that's so funny. That's probably not a me recommendation. But...
Yeah, probably not. It is not everyone's cup of tea. It's not even like half of everyone's cup of tea. Like I am going for like a very small group of readers out there.
And I know who love it, absolutely love it.
Absolutely love it. And the authors openly say it, because I know some people will just read it as a challenge kind of thing. The authors openly say it on like the first page. They're just like, "Friends and family, please exit now." They're like, "Do not read this." And they're just like, "People, like, these are all of our trigger warnings. If you are just going to like read all of our trigger warnings, know that you hate it and then read it anyways. Please do not blow us up on Goodreads." Like they know what they are writing about, kind of thing. Yep. Honestly, I think I need to go back and like that second book. I think I like rated probably as like a 1 star, and I think I need to go back and write it as a 5 star, because like I'm not kidding you. Like it is so fucked up. It is like I'm openly telling you. It is so messed up that I guarantee you the vast majority of people who have read it do not put it on their Goodreads. Yeah. It's like, they're like, "Oh, wow, people are going to actually see that I read this book." Yeah, it's so bad. But it goes back to that thing of like, I still think about it.
Yeah, that's true.
And so
that doesn't mean that it was necessarily good though.
Yeah. Like for like what it is, like again, like good writing, like, oh my God, like jaw is on the floor. I'm like, holy crap. Was I glued to the page? Absolutely.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, it is messed up. So for those who love to read messed up books, I just served it to you on a platter. Go for it.
Yeah. I mean, I don't generally enjoy reading that type of stuff. But it's also like, I can see when there are just things that people like. And then other times I'm like, this is just unnecessary. Like you're just throwing this shit in here just for the sake of throwing it in. And there's no place in the plot. And this is also just like, no, like just no, we could just leave this out and you would still have a solid story here. That's where I'm kind of like, the rating's going to go lower. But also I just generally don't read those types of books. So that's just me. Taking a vanilla turn here from that. I have 2 other romance books that are traditionally published that I think people will like, that do both have steamy scenes in them, but it's nothing like what Kara was just describing. So People We Meet on Vacation by Emily Henry is a
good one.
Great summer recommendation. Mm-hmm. It's these 2 best friends, guy and girl, who have grown apart over the years because there was some epic like fight or something. They used to go on vacation together every single year because the girl is a travel writer. And then something happens. And so it's again like dual perspective, but also dual timeline. So it's very fast because you're constantly looking at like, okay, well, what's this person going to say? What's this person going to say? And then you're slowly starting to see the story unfold. And it's a great time. Would highly recommend for the summer. Another one is called The Soulmate Equation by Christina Lauren, which is where this main character is a single mom and one of her friends was like, "Oh, you should like enter on this dating app or whatever." And the dating app like basically sequences your DNA and spits out what is supposedly your soulmate. And so then the creator of the technology for the app also inputs his data and she matches with him and they're a 98% match. And so then you follow their story of kind of like fake dating for the press because it would be really good for the app. But then they're like, are we soulmates? Are we not really soulmates? And it was just a great time. Highly recommend.
I love it. I have not read The Soulmate Equation, but People We Meet on Vacation, so good. And you know what I loved about that book is so often when you have a best friend in a romance dynamic, usually they get written off and then they bring in like the bad boy type person to like replace, like just like, and like the best friend is seen as boring or he doesn't challenge her. No, sometimes they're just sweet and wonderful and like worship the girl. And so that's why I love like that book so much. Like that was an adorable read.
The one thing I will say is like, I'm not a big Emily Henry person. So that I've read 3 of her books. I've read that one, Beach Read, and then Book Lovers. I am in the minority. I did not like Beach Read. Like there were parts of it that were fine, but I was just like, what? I did not enjoy it like other people did. And then I didn't love Book Lovers either.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I'm in the minority, but I'm just kind of like, I can like kind of take it or leave it with Emily Henry, where there are other people that are Emily Henry stans and they're like, I will read every single thing that she writes, no matter how good or bad it is. And I'm just not in that camp. But People We Meet on Vacation, great book.
Great book. All right. Ready to shit on some books?
Yes.
Okay. I want to start because it actually is the worst book I have ever read in my entire life. It is also a dark romance book, but unlike the like Lords of Pain books, the writing is so bad. The plot makes no sense. There is no point to literally anything. The best Goodreads review I have ever read in my entire life is about this book. And I will read it to you now. And I'm not going to be able to get through the whole thing without laughing. Okay. When I was in year 6, the day before my birthday, a bee stung me on the eyelid. The pain was agonizing me, and my mom had to dig the stinger out of my inflamed, irritated eyelid while I cried. It was agony. And yet, reading this book was nonetheless the single worst experience of my life.
Oh my God. I thought you were like reading from the book and I was like, okay, this writing isn't horrible. And then I realized it was a Goodreads review.
That's so funny. And yet reading this book is nonetheless the single worst experience of my life. It was so funny, but it's so true. Nothing in this book, like it was a TikTok like romance book or whatever, and it is so bad. Like the writing is atrocious. Like nothing makes sense. Nothing comes back around. Like there's this part, like the only time I was like slightly interested was way at the beginning where this girl owns a bar and someone comes in, they have a brawl and they break her chair. And she's like, I only have one rule, like don't break my furniture. And she like takes a bat to his knees or something. And it never explains why she has this rule. Like, it's like something that she wrote about, like in one chapter, just like, I have one rule, like, don't break my furniture. And she gets super pissed and beats the shit out of someone and then never talks about it again. It's never explained. That is how the entire book is. Like, something happens and it is never brought up again. There's no backstory. It's just like, here. It'd be like, he plants a vegetable garden and then, like, are you like, what happened to the vegetable garden? Like, did they grow? Did it die? Like, nothing. It's the dumbest book I've ever read in my life. Dana is so confused right now.
Oh my God. So when you put this prompt on here, I had a lot of trouble finding one because I'm at the point in my reading life where if I notice within the first 50 pages that I'm hating a book, I'll just DNF it. And then I feel like I can't really say that those books are like my worst book of all time because I didn't read the whole thing.
Oh, you can totally say that. The rest of mine on this list, I did not finish.
I mean, if I read like 50% or more, I'm like, okay, I gave it a good shot and this is a piece of garbage. So the backstory to this is that I was reading this book while I was on vacation in Hawaii. And on the plane ride there, I read like 2 books that I was really anticipating on my Kindle. And then we got there and I was like, fuck, I don't know what I'm going to read now. So I was just looking on Kindle Unlimited. And there was this book that came up called Eat, Pray, FML. And I was like, oh, that sounds funny.
Yeah.
And this book was just a oh my God, poor me, white girl, I'm so privileged. And I just wanted to be like, shut up. The first part of it was like kind of funny. And then after that, I was like, why did you even bother wasting trees for this book? Like, I feel bad for the trees that got cut down to make this book. And I think it's mostly on Kindle Unlimited anyway. So maybe no trees were harmed in the making of this book. But like, honestly, I can't even believe it has a 3.5 average rating because it was horse shit. Okay, all right. This is a great Goodreads review. I'm gonna read this. This is not mine. The first review that pops up on Goodreads for this book is, wow, so many thoughts for this book, and most of them are not good. I never read Eat, Pray, Love, so I can't compare the two books. But if you're looking for a book that is very shallow in nature, no character development, not really even about self-love, but mostly about a girl who struggles with a breakup by going to Europe, partying all night, drinking all day every day, eating food, making out, and sleeping with other people, but not being able to actually sleep while complaining about how fat she's going to get, then this book is for you. And that is exactly how I felt about this stupid ass book.
That sounds insufferable.
Yeah, she really, and just her voice, this is rude, but like her tone while writing was insufferable. The way that she wrote was insufferable. And listen, girl, I'm sorry, but like, you are just not for me.
Just not for me.
Let's talk about other hyped books that we did not like.
Oh man. Okay. I finished one out of my three. But the one that I finished, I don't want to talk about it that much because I know that we talked about this once, is The Spanish Love Deception. Everyone was in love with this 2 years ago. I was bored to tears. I thought it was so boring. I remember being like 70% of the way through and they had their first kiss. It was everyone gets annoyed with like the miscommunication trope, but this was so overdone. It was just dumb. Yeah. I finished it because it was so hyped. It was one of those books I'm just like, well, it's going to get better. You know, all romance books get better the further you read. Nope. I should have DNF'd it.
Ugh, that stinks. Yeah, this first one is an interesting one because this is a fantasy romance series also on Kindle Unlimited. I also read this on the same trip in Hawaii.
Wow.
So there's this series called the Plated Prisoner series. The first book is Guild. It's been getting more and more traction lately by Raven Kennedy.
Yeah.
The first book, I fucking hated it. I hated it, but mostly because I don't enjoy reading about on-page abuse. I don't enjoy reading about that kind of shit. And so I was just like, this main character is in this position that she was like kidnapped or something, but then it's also like Stockholm syndrome, and then it's just like a whole harem in there, and then there's just abuse, and it's a King Midas retelling, and it's got like an interesting twist on it. The first book I was like, ugh, but I had nothing else to read. And I was like, but I've heard good things about this series. Like, I was
considering reading this, yeah.
Well, wait, you might want to, because you know, any fantasy romance. The last like 100 pages, I was like, oh, okay, intrigued. And it ended in a way where I was like, I would consider giving the second book a chance. Second and third book, 5 stars. I had a great time with the second and third book. The fourth book, so originally this series, I think, was supposed to be 5 books. Potentially it's now 6 books. So I read the fourth book when it came out because that was that same summer after I read 1, 2, 3. And the fourth book took me forever to get through. It was such a slog. There was like no character development, like nothing really happened. But I might still consider reading 5 because 2 and 3 were so good. So I know this author has potential. But the first book, my God, I did not like it. I would not reread it. Honestly, I think you could kind of read a synopsis for book 1 and go straight into book 2.
Right,
but if you are a Kindle Unlimited reader, you might really like the first book.
Right.
And really love the second and third. So that was kind of like a back and forth. I hate this. No, I don't.
Right. Okay. My second one. Okay. So I feel like I gave this book a chance? I read over 100 pages, which I feel like is like
a chance.
The threshold is We Hunt the Flame.
Mm-hmm.
It seemed right up my alley. Nothing happened. I can't even tell you what the plot was because I genuinely...
I can, because I just read it.
Did you finish it?
No, I DNF'd it too.
Okay. How far did you get?
I got 50%.
Whoa.
Which is like 230 pages or something. Okay. So all of you probably know I was just in Taiwan in April, and I started reading this book on Kindle Unlimited before we left. I did not read a single other book the entire trip, which includes 2 long-ass plane rides both ways because I couldn't get through this book. I have heard fantastic things about her new book that just came out, A Tempest of Tea, but like nothing really happened. And it was so frustrating because like the book had so much potential, but the 2 main characters in We Hunt the Flame were just like maddeningly without a personality, but like it's said that they have a really big personality, but it's not on page. And you're like, well, what? Like, why are we rooting for these people? The concept and the premise of it, of like stolen magic and we're going on this quest and all this other stuff, like sounds so cool. But it just, the execution just did not work for me. And it really put me in like a big slump. So I was like, you know what? I'm just going to DNF
it. No,
I
seriously.
was so sad.
It took me forever to get through those 100 pages. And I actually, when I got like roughly to like 100 pages was when they left for this quest. And I was like, this should have been page 1 or page 5. And that it's like, instead of sticking it out, I was like, no, like if this is the pacing of this book, I cannot. Like if it took 100 pages just to get this far, no way.
Yeah, I remember doing like a check-in on Storygraph on like page 150, and I was like, wow, something just happened that was interesting, but it took 150 pages to get there. And then there's like a huge lull after that. Like I can't really say they're on the quest by page 250, but like they don't really know much more. Almost nothing else has happened. Like, yeah, so I felt really sad about it because I had high hopes for that, but
Right.
wasn't great. Another overhyped book that I just like, I don't understand why people love so much, and I read the whole thing, is Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. And I did the thing, you're supposed to read the audiobook because it's in interview format. That's the one thing I will give it, is like this book, which is kind of like a fictionalized retelling of Fleetwood Mac and the relationships between the people in the band and how they ended up breaking up and stuff like that. The premise was interesting, and the way that it was done was an interesting concept, but the execution, I was like, I just don't care when we're following these people's different stories and stuff. I just didn't find it particularly interesting. I haven't watched the show. I have heard that it's good. I mean, maybe the show would be better, but I don't know. It just wasn't for me. But I also just don't, I think I love watching reality TV, but I don't care for books that are about celebrities or fictionalized celebrities or influencers. I just kind of think they're annoying. So maybe that's a me thing.
Which goes perfectly into my number 3. This is something I did read this year, so I thought about saving it for our end of the year thing, but it was so terrible. I have to bring it up. And that is Powerless. Forgetting the author's name, so I will Google her.
Lauren Roberts.
Oh, thank you. Wow, good job. Yeah, Lauren Roberts. Okay. On the one hand, this girl literally wrote this book at 18 years old. So go her. I mean, I wasn't doing shit with my life at 18 years old. So good job. But my awe for that, for like writing that book at such a young age, is stripped away because her entire book is stolen. Like it honestly, and also I'm definitely of the party of like, there's no new tropes. It's all been done before. You know, when people freak out and accuse everyone of copying, what am I trying to say right now? Fourth Wing, you know, whenever someone is like, oh, she has lightning, you're just copying Fourth Wing. It's like, dude, Red Queen she has lightning. And that was written in 2015. Get over yourself. So I'm definitely, you know, and that was stolen from Greek mythology, which was written, you know, thousands of years ago. So get over yourselves. But this was so obviously stolen. I'm just like, how are we praising this person? Okay. And it was so ironic because the series that I read before this is what was like stolen. Okay. So people are accusing Powerless of copying Hunger Games, which it does in some ways, but that I could get over. What I cannot get over is it's copying over The Young Elites. And The Young Elites is not a very well-known series. So I just read it. I only read 2 books. And then I loved the first book, and then I really lost interest in the second one. Dana has read it in completion. This is the premise of The Young Elites. Okay. You have a girl. She is born in like the slums, essentially, in a dystopian whatever, there is a huge plague that is left in, like, those who were infected by this plague have superpowers, and they are called the young elites. They are called the elites. Okay? This is the premise of Powerless. There is a girl. She is born in the slums. There is a plague in the kingdom that infected certain people and gave them magical powers. And those people are called the elites. It is like the same fucking book.
Yeah.
I could not believe it. The literal only change between these two books is the fact that in the young elites, the elites are persecuted, and in Powerless, it's the opposite, where people with powers are praised, and then everyone without powers are persecuted. That is the only difference. There's also with the characters, even the magical power of the main male character is even the same. So the guy in both books, his power is to mimic other powers. So for example, if you can pull lightning, if he is in close proximity, now he can wield lightning. It blew my mind that no one is talking about this. A lot of people accuse her again of stealing from the Hunger Games because again, it's the exact same thing. A bunch of children are put in this arena to essentially fight for the death. Same fucking concept. And then also stole from Red Queen because the beginning is the same. Again, girl born in the slums, it's the exact same premise. Pickpockets the crown prince and then somehow gets back to the castle. She stole, like, these 3 books, she stole her entire book, like every character, every plot. Even
I also heard that there were like entire specific scenes lifted from the Hunger Games.
There is a sentence that I can remember. I remember vividly in like the last Red Queen book, there is a sentence where the girl says to the main guy, "If you die, I'll kill you." And that sentence is in Powerless. Like, it is so freaking stolen. And again, this girl was a book talker. And she became super popular. And then she said, "I'm going to write a book." And so she is selling to other teenagers who did not, who have not read these other books because they were written, in the millennium, like,
before they were born.
Essentially. And so, I was just, and honestly, even with all that, because again, I understand things are done again and again. If it was written well, and if like the characters were so new, I honestly could have overlooked it. But the writing is not good. The characters are not good. The dialogue is so tropey and so cringy and so like insta-love that I couldn't stomach it anymore. I was actually mad at myself because I did buy this because I was in a book slump and I heard so many good things. I was like, well, this is going to get me out of my book slump. Everyone's talking about it. I'm actually mad at myself that I bought it on Kindle and supported this author because everything is stolen.
Yeah, that sucks. Well, it's crazy that, I mean, before I heard you talk about that, and then there's a booktuber that I follow named Mel Reads, and you had been texting me this, and then I was watching her like month wrap up or whatever. Same thing. She had to DNF it because she went like line by line. This is lifted from the Hunger Games. She didn't talk about the Young Elites because it is a lesser well-known series. I've talked about this author,
but that's why she got away with
Marie
it.
Lu.
That's why she got away with it because not a lot of people read this book. So it's just like, if you were that author, if you were Marie Lu, I would be infuriated.
Yeah. And she has written many books. I think I don't know what the publishing order was, but I think that is one of her earlier series. She has a series of 4 books called the Legend series, which I loved. Warcross, which is a duology, frickin' loved. The Young Elites was probably my 3rd favorite series of hers. Like, I didn't love it as much. There were certain elements in there that were so cool, and then there were other ones where I was like, where are we going here? But overall, I had a good time with that series. And then she has another one that's kind of like a Bach retelling or something like that. I don't really know. I didn't read that one, but she might even she has a new book called Stars and Smoke or something like that. But anyway, she's not like a super, super popular author, at least now. But And, a word like elites is a common word, but
When it means the exact same thing, like, come on.
And well, not only does it mean the exact same thing, the powers are exactly the same. The plague is the same. The setup is the same. It's just like, what is going on? And it's not the fault of these teenagers who love this book or people who love this book, because if you haven't read those other books, it probably is super exciting and that's such a cool concept and other stuff like that. But when you're like us and you're old and you've read these other backdated series, you're like, wait a minute, we need to kind of roll the tapes and be like, what's your source material? Because you can't just plagiarize. I don't know what you learned in high school, but you definitely learned that you can't plagiarize.
Yeah. Yeah, that blew my mind.
Wow. Well, I think we end there.
That's it. That's it.
Oh my gosh.
But honestly, for us having such a terrible reading year, only shitting on like 3 books. No, wait, I shit on 4 books. And we had a lot of like good like recommendations in there. But
yeah, and you know what? Like, I have had way better luck reading wise than you have this year. Like, my first 2 reads of the year were both 5 stars, and I had that Vera Wong book that I mentioned was in February. I had a great time. I read another book in March, which I'm really like, I don't know if worried is the right word, but I'm worried it might be my favorite book of the year because it's going to be hard to top it. And then I just read another good book. So like, I basically did not read all of April, and the other books that I read in March, duds. So I was having like a 2.5 month span where I was like, oh my God, like besides this one book, am I going to find things that I like? What's happening? But things are looking up for me, but I'm going to save them for the end of the year.
Love it.
See you all then.
Yeah.
Okay, that was a lot. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, don't worry if you didn't write anything down. If you forgot something, everything will be written down in a very nicely organized bulleted list for you. It's linked in the show notes, so go check that out.